Chapter 11, Guess Who's Coming to Rule? Chapter 11, Guess Who's Coming to the Castle? Bowsette entered Peach's castle. It was far from the first time, and as of now it would be far, far from the last.
"Let me go!"
Peach shouted, struggling to get away from Bowsette's grip. Bowsette responded by tossing her forward, and she skidded across the way too polished floor until she brushed up against the staircase at the back of the foyer.
"This is mine now,"
Bowsette said.
"I've beaten you and you should surrender yourself and all your forces unless you want more people to get hurt." "No, I can't."
Peach laid her head down.
"You win." "I know. I do, don't I? Ka.
Peach began to cry, but Bowsette kept laughing and walked past her.
"Guards! Take her into her bedroom and lock her away."
Bowsette walked up the stairs and entered the throne room. It was small, enough room to fit only a few dozen people, no more. It was good enough for him. He sashayed over to the throne itself, lined with gold and with red velvet cushions that looked absolutely comfortable. As King Koopa, he would never have even considered such a throne, his body too burly, his stature too sizable, his scales too thick. Nothing would have benefited that kind of body more than a throne of iron. As Bowsette, though, she sat down, and felt an immense, intense sense of the essence of peace. She spread her legs wide and leaned back, laughing quietly to herself. Queen of the Mushroom Kingdom. Or, Lordess, as she had taken to calling herself. She finally felt a major burst of relief after all these weeks of fighting and beating people up. She wondered if they had any able Jews stocked up around here. Welp, here it was. She won. She had taken over the Mushroom Kingdom, just like she planned. Now what? End of chapter. Chapter 12, Lordess of the Mushroom Kingdom. Chapter 12, Lordess of the Mushroom Kingdom.
"Hello. I'm your host, MC Ballyhoo. And I'm here with you live on Ballyhoo tonight with our new guest, the mystical wizard Merlin."
Merlin sat in the chair next to Ballyhoo and tried to make himself look comfortable in front of an audience of millions. Of course, at the moment there were merely cameras, and the audience was small, quiet, not easily laughing so far.
"Hello, I'm happy to be here,"
Merlin said.
"How are you adjusting to your new life?"
Ballyhoo asked.
"Now that you're the defense minister, you've sure got a lot on your plate, especially with serving your country."
The audience clapped and politely cheered with their patriotic fervor. Very polite.
"It's..."
Merlin paused. He loathed himself for taking the job. He knew he wanted to stop Bowsette from taking control of the country. He hated her so much, but he took the job to work to keep Mushroom Kingdom safe as much as he could. He knew that she had essentially sidelined him and kept him in a position where he could be of little influence, but he had to keep the spirits of a conquered people alive. He couldn't just quit.
"It's going very well. We're making a lot of progress. Goomboss has surrendered his claims over Goomba Village and the Shiver City Republican Confederation has submitted to Mushroom Kingdom oversight. The threats in our wake are fading and we will be able to rest easy without fear of destruction."
Except for from their very own dictator.
"That's awesome!"
Ballyhoo shouted.
"Gee whiz! Want to go have a party?" "Why? Yeah, That's exactly what I want to do.
Merlin was trapped in a world of appeasement. He had to save the people of the Mushroom Kingdom by keeping them content. He had to appease the Lordess Bowsette by keeping her pleased. And he had to appease his inner conscience, telling him everything he was doing was wrong. To accomplish the first two, he had to set aside the third. Merlin and Ballyhoo began dancing on stage to a jiggy tune, and it took all he had to keep from crying. Paracari swooped down to Luigi's house and dropped off a letter.
Letter for the Marios. Addressed to the Mario household.
He saw Luigi and noticed that the man was in his pajamas, hair disheveled and eyes sagging. What a wreck! What a loser! He didn't know of the contents of the letter, of course, as opening letters was against the sacred duty of mailmen across the globe, even if they had bombs or lethal toxins inside. It was a relationship between the sender and the reader, and that was the only thing that mattered. Mailmen were the middlemen, the mediums to all of this. Not participants. However, Luigi's expression brightened considerably when he read through the letter.
Thanks, Paracari,
he said softly.
Not a problem.
He flew away and wondered what about could have been in that letter, what its contents may have been. If he were in Luigi's position, he would have been a depressed loser himself. If his wife had been kicked past the curvature of the earth and due to his poor fighting abilities, well, that would have been utterly humiliating. But Paracari's fighting days were in the past, anyway. He was getting too old for that shit. So he was just glad that kind of situation would never present itself to him. Several Koopas sat together at a bar, watching TV as the latest tennis match between Rosalina and Nina, facing off to win the all-new Bowsette Cup that had been created just a few weeks ago. Rosalina was basically cheating what with her ability to levitate off the ground at all times, but she was still losing to her opponent so far. One of these Koopas was Cooper, a former partner of Mario and currently gulping down his fourth drink of,
zesty.
His friends were rowdy watching the tennis match, but he faced away from them, instead staring at the large portrait of Bowsette that was now legally mandated to be placed in a prime location in all restaurants, bars, and places of food or drink service. Her image was captured in the midst of laughing, her sharpened fangs showing an heavy amount of cleavage right in the center of the frame. They had all ogled it at first, but now it was clear that it had become an eyesore in an otherwise classy establishment. If Colorado were still around, surely he'd have thought of something to help them out of this jam. But Cooper, he just wasn't strong enough. One of Cooper's friends noticed his dour mood and put his hand on his shell.
Cooper, what's wrong? What's wrong? We're being ruled by this jerk here and... Well, we had enough of that already, didn't we?
Cooper had had a little too much tea to be able to form coherent thoughts at this point.
Bowsette? Aw man.
One of the other Koopas said.
Saw her in person the other day when she spoke in Shroom City. Finest piece of shell I've ever seen. Why's she got that shell anyway?
Another asked.
She part Koopa or something?
The other shrugged.
She's just another Bowser or something,
Cooper mumbled.
Koopa Village ain't for that.
But tensions between Toads and Koopas had begun running higher ever since Bowsette's takeover. Koopas were being more readily recognized for new government positions. Koopa Village was receiving more financial assistance than Goomba Village, even though the latter had just been raised after the Goombas skirmishes. Colorado's wife had gotten a death threat on her answering machine the other day.
It may suck here,
one of the Koopas said.
but it still beats Bowser Land. Never going back to that horrid place. I heard there's been a lot of bloodshed out there these days, with all the Koopalings or whatever. Mushroom Kingdom's way better. But then why did Cooper go back?
Cooper asked, starting to cry. Cooper and Cooper had gotten so close recently, and then suddenly, he was just going back to the place where everyone's treated like slaves. It was insanity. And he couldn't even stop him. Cooper continued into his 5th drink. And then his 6th. Rosalina ended up winning the tennis match. Lumpy and Mustafa sat together under the shade in an unassuming bench in an unassuming part of dry desert. Lumpy hadn't considered that this type of meeting would actually be happening, not in a million years, but it looked like he was finally making it happen. Bowsette's wonders never ceased.
So, how are things going?
Lumpy asked, his mousy whiskers twitching as to give Mustafa an indication that things were currently okay to divulge the good details.
We excavated the pyramids and Tutankhamun's grave has a great many wonders that we can use. Its ancient chain chomp forces are excellent. And so you've given my proposal some thought?
Lumpy asked.
An exclusive, lifetime contract with the Lumpy Oil Conglomerate Association, Limited? For all our energy and water supplies. It's a tough one. But you'll be safe,
Lumpy added.
I can protect the Dry Republic with all means at my disposal. Buzzer protects Mount Rugged, and my oil tankers by the sea. It may seem too aggressive.
Mustafa was always waffling back and forth. He was not a true leader. He was a puppet, and that is exactly what Lumpy required him to be for his oil empire to truly succeed.
If you secede, they will invade. It doesn't matter if it's Peach or Bowsette, they will invade.
Lumpy clasped his hands together.
You must do what's best for your people. You're right.
Lumpy smiled.
Then we have a deal.
Huff and Puff looked down from the clouds, past flower fields, down to the world below. Nimbus Land had fallen, and was now an official territory of the Mushroom Kingdom. The royal family had fled and were in exile in Delfino. But Huff and Puff's territory had remained untouched. A land of plants and nature, a world of beauty and strategic resources, shooting stars were quite powerful. A land of tough puffs and lucky twos that reigned free, or as free as Huff and Puff would let them be. And yet, why hadn't the Mushroom Kingdom attacked him? Why wasn't he given the chance for a negotiated surrender, giving him asylum and free access to Mushroom Kingdom diplomatic resources so that he could leave this dreadful place and finally get on with his life? It's not like he wanted to be a dictator. It just sort of happened. And if they weren't going to take his land over, he couldn't just invade them, or it wouldn't be the same. He wouldn't be making the same mistake as Goomboss, Brighton rest his soul. Why was Nimbus Land chosen and not flower fields? It wasn't fair. Everything that Bowsette woman did, it was too irrational. She was such a poor dictator. Huff and Puff just wished he could guide her. But it seemed as if that was never going to happen. End of chapter. Chapter 13, Chapter 13, Peach in Captivity, as usual. Chapter 13, Peach in Captivity, as usual. The weather was beautiful and the fresh air smelled great from up on the balcony. However, Princess Peach, deposed monarch of the Mushroom Kingdom, could not be out there to enjoy it. While the windows were open, they were also barred, and access to the balcony was now forbidden after her third escape attempt. So now there was nothing much for her to do with her life except for wandering around the room, reading the stacks of books on her shelves, and laying in bed staring up at the ceiling. She felt like she was the protagonist of some teen fantasy novel, trapped in a life she didn't want to live, in a fate she wanted to escape from, because she really just wanted to see her girlfriend, who was way more exciting than the boring stuffy aristocratic life she had been through for all these years, and yet she found herself in her bedroom alone more often than not. Not that Peach was literally any of these things, but she sure felt like it sometimes. Maybe she had been reading too many books lately. There were a few knocks on her door, and the guards let 2 guests in. Normally, visits were strictly supervised, but her own handmaidens were certainly allowed to come and go as they pleased. Now, what Bowsette didn't know was that these 2 handmaidens were not actually handmaidens, but plain and simple friends of hers, but it wasn't Peach's fault that Bowsette had a hard time telling Toads apart.
Toadette! Toadico! You're here!
Peach exclaimed. She hugged her 2 favorite girls in the whole world together and squeezed them together.
What brings you here today? Well,
Toadette began, but she trailed off. Toadico nudged her with her shoulder a few times.
Oh, well, we do have some good news. Please, do tell,
Peach said.
Being up here in this room all day, not knowing the way the world is turning. Bowsette won't even tell me who's visiting on official business anymore, she just slides reports under my door every week. A lot of things are going badly,
Toadico said.
Yoshi's Island is a target for annexation now, and a lot of people are upset about it. Oh my! That's the good news. Toadico! Shut up, dude!
Toadette said.
The good news is that Mario's coming back. We got a letter from one of his allies, a young man named Gene, who has apparently joined Mario's new team. He's going around the world fighting minions and bosses to try to reclaim, something. He wasn't clear. But it means Mario is still out there.
As he always was. Mario was always going on these grand adventures, collecting things, and meeting a whole lot of new characters. Especially girls. Mario loved collecting new girls and their hearts. He certainly was a ladies' man and nothing was ever going to change in that regard. He wondered who the new flame was going to be this time. Rekindling his fling with Vivian right in front of Peach was a bit too much for her to take back a few weeks ago, but if everything went all right now, she would be willing to look past all of this. Any of this. She just wanted Mario back.
I'm really happy for him. I'll be looking forward to when he gets here.
Peach said, with a hint of envy in her voice.
Is that all? Okay, so...
Toadette stammered out a non-response and began to blush.
Princess! Is it okay if I tell you something that might be a bit awkward? Go ahead.
Peach stepped back and sat on her bed.
I think I might know something about Bowsette that will surprise some people. Like that. She isn't who she says she is. The reason she looks so much like you is because I think she's wearing a super crown. A super crown?
Peach was aghast.
But those are locked securely in the royal treasury. There's no way for anyone to access it except for... well...
Toadette's face was as red as Captain Toad's cap.
There was one time when I might have, taken one over to Mario's house to, show it to him.
Peach realized the implications of Toadette essentially role-playing as Peach herself at Mario's home and decided never to think about this ever again.
So what you're saying is that there's one that was just out there? Well, at least one. At least one at Mario's house. And so what, Bowsette, is Mario trying to pretend to be his own villain? Or someone got their hands on it at some point,
Toadeko added.
And now Bowsette has it.
Peach considered this. Could this truly be just some random desperate rival using one of the Mushroom Kingdom's own power-ups against it? And for what? It made no sense. Was it some no-name like Totanga or something who just couldn't muster up the resources necessary to plot a new attack? Who knows?
Well, thank you for this new information. If we can figure out who she is, maybe we can.
Bowsette burst into the bedroom, slamming the door open.
Peach!
The three women in the room jumped. She noticed the toads and pointed towards the door, saying,
"You two, get out of here. I'm talking to Peach. Alone."
They scurried away, and then Bowsette was now alone with Peach. She stood in front of her, hands on her hips with a fiery expression for some time, her tail wagging like a cat about to strike, but she didn't speak. Peach was a bit confused.
"Bowsette? Is there something wrong?"
Peach asked. Bowsette slumped over.
"Yeah." What is it?" I don't want to do this anymore. I hate being a stupid ruler of a stupid kingdom."
Peach was taken aback. Why was she telling her? They barely knew each other, unless underneath the guise of that super crown there was something else. They hadn't directly spoken in weeks.
I'm sorry. And I need to admit something to you,"
Bowsette said.
"I'm Bowser."
End of chapter. Chapter 14, Chapter 14, The Reveal. Chapter 14, The Reveal.
"Oh."
That's all Peach could say for the moments after Bowser revealed himself to her.
"Oh."
The thing that struck Peach as the most odd about their conversation was just the fact that Bowsette looked so weirdly similar to her. There were many differences. Obviously Peach had never, and would never under any circumstance, wear a shell on her back with spikes, nor a tail, especially not as long as that, but their faces, their dresses, their body types. They were nearly identical. Though Peach was probably exaggerating on the body types part. Bowsette was noticeably taller, noticeably better endowed. Peach was not exactly dainty by any stretch of the imagination, but she certainly wasn't as gifted with such bodacious, benefits. So it was almost like twins sitting together, side by side on Peach's bed. This was such an unexpected development that Peach had not been able to process it whatsoever, but she had put her arm around Bowsette in a consoling move. Bowsette? Was Bowser? She never would have thought of it. How could anyone have?
It's just been so long since I've actually succeeded at anything that I never would have thought I'd have been so bored by it,"
Bowser cried out. His voice was the furthest thing apart about the two. While Peach's voice was soft and cute, Bowsette's was pitchy and growling. That was the real way to tell the two apart. That, and the fact that Peach wasn't the one breaking down in sobs.
Why would you even want to rule the Mushroom Kingdom?
Peach asked.
You gave up being King Koopa, didn't you? I didn't want to rule it. I just wanted to conquer it. And, I did. Why didn't you just go to one of those fighting tournaments, then? It's not the same.
Bowser rested his head on her shoulder, and the super crown was resting against the back of Peach's head.
This is too weird,
Peach said.
Bowser, can you take that crown off now?
Bowser's body tensed up.
No, I don't really want to. How come? I like it,
Bowser said.
I like being in a woman's body. It makes me feel electric. More powerful than my Koopa body. Humans are so frail and weak, and yet every step I take as Bowsette is.
Bowser stopped and chuckled.
What is it? I just realized, I'm closer to you now than any time when we were married,
he said.
We were never actually married. It was always shams and kidnappings. Legally they count. Bowser. Actually, at least when I'm like this, can you call me Bowsette? It's kind of weird, when I'm wearing the super crown. You know. I understand, Bowsette. So, even if I feel more energetic and powerful than I have in years, I'm still bored, still sad, and defeating Mario didn't even do anything. What's wrong with me? Am I broken?
Peach didn't feel like she was qualified to answer this question whatsoever.
You're not broken. You just have to figure out what makes you happy and stick to that. No more invading countries and beating people up and taking over governments. But I'm so good at it. I've annexed 2 provinces of Sarasa land and Princess Daisy hasn't made a single military move against me. How awesome is that?
When Peach returned to the throne, she was going to have a lot of cleanup duty to accomplish, she was sure of it. But that was for another time. Right now was figuring out what the heck was wrong with Bowsette. She just seemed so sad. Peach had never in all this time facing off against her realized any of this. She spent so much time trying to escape her and fight her and beat her in kart races that she had never really considered her. Not the woman in front of her, nor the lizard in front of her.
You're probably a terrible person, but you aren't a bad one,
Peach said.
I hate you and want you to get beaten up, but you don't deserve to feel the way you do.
Bowsette was extremely confused.
It's complicated, okay.
Peach was also extremely confused. She felt pity and anger simultaneously, and that was a dangerous combination of emotions.
Yeah, so I think I'm done with all this evil dictator stuff,
Bowsette said. She took her head off Peach's shoulder and stood up, wiping her dress off as if it had been dirted by the mud.
You're free to go. Or whatever.
She was free to leave. No more being trapped in her own bedroom. No more being held captive by this jerk. Peach stood up as well.
You know what? Thank you,
Peach said. And then she kneed Bowsette in the crotch. Obviously it wasn't nearly as painful now that Bowsette didn't have any man parts to attack, but it still knocked Bowsette to the floor for a moment. She stormed out of the room, and the castle, and kept walking in a random direction. It didn't matter if Bowsette was feeling the way she was feeling. She had no right to be the absolute jerk she was, and now that Peach was free, she was never going to deal with any of that garbage ever again. Even though she felt bad for her, it was still very complicated. End of chapter. Chapter 15, Chapter 15, Bored to be Queen. Chapter 15, Bored to be Queen. Sigh. Bowsette sighed. That's all she ever did these days. She laid down in her throne, feet against one of the armrests and head against the other. He still couldn't believe he was small enough to actually do it.
Yo, Toadsworth!
She yelled out past the throne room.
Come over here and get me some more triple pie.
If she had access to a pie bazooka, there was not telling the wanton pie-related destruction she would surely be causing right now, but for now eating a bunch of it was good enough. Toadsworth huffed away, doing his master's bidding at any cost but still grumbling while doing so. Bowsette didn't even care about this anymore. She didn't want to rule the country and attack a bunch of countries for dumb resources because that's all she ever did when she was King Koopa, Master of Realms Unknown, the unwise Fury Sage. But it was such an automatic now that she hardly even thought of it when her generals came in the other morning to discuss tactics and she had gotten them to enact a strategy to send a false force to distract in Stardust Fields while the main army invaded the Bean Kingdom by way of Sherbet Land, a no-man's land between Shiver City and Hoo Mountain. They went through with it completely and Bowsette had hardly even thought about it. Whatever. Peach was around but she was refusing to talk to her. Something about how taking her as a captive prisoner for a month was not the right way to treat a woman. Bah. Well. Man, Bowsette had never thought about that kind of thing. Certainly she had never been held captive for any extended period, but she had most certainly held many women captive. Almost entirely women. It was kind of rude, wasn't it? Ugh. Now Bowsette felt really guilty. Without regard to the pies that would soon come upon her, she got up from the throne and headed downstairs to the garden. Peach was usually there this time of day, feeding the piranha plants, with water, just water. But when she reached the door, it was shut and locked. She knocked on it and didn't get a response.
Is there anyone in there?
She asked.
Hello? Peach.
Still no response. She knocked one more time, and,
I don't want to see you, Bowsette. Wait, I want to apologize.
Bowsette yelled through the door.
I don't care.
Harsh. You would think Bowsette was a bad person or something. Well, she gave it a shot. And now she was going to go back and get a pie, because all the toad guardsmen laid unconscious on the floor, littered around the foyer like someone went to a doll convention and bought way too much on their credit card. And for some reason bought the same kind of doll. Standing in front of Bowsette were 5 individuals. Mario, a giant stopwatch, a woman in a white dress, a woman with a pink afro, a man in a fedora, and a giant wooden dude.
It's us!
Mario shouted, pointing at Bowsette with an accusatory glare. In his other hand he held a giant red and blue orb shaped like a mushroom. Ah, crap. End of chapter. Chapter 16, Chapter 16, Big Fight Chapter. Chapter 16, Big Fight Chapter. Mario jumped, as he was known to do. He had returned after a long month's journey traveling from a distant continent, collecting the 7 mushroom souls scattered across the planet in hopes of delaying its use and sealing ancient evils should they ever arise, and teaming up with the 5 men and women who were currently behind him. And they stood brave. The brave time soldier that had fought in the bloody temporal wars and later helped defeat the evil Wizpig on Timbers Island. Princess Shokara, the spirit of a long-lost royalty of a long-lost civilization, brought back to life by the power of friendship. Jamie Thang, a pink afro-wearing disco dancer and all-around groovy gal. Jean, former pro golfer and current master of the swordsman arts and seeker of female love. And finally, Gino, the doll brought to life we all know and love. Together, they could do anything. Bowsette responded to Mario's jump predictably. She shot several fireballs into the air and left herself completely defenseless for a deadly Gino beam attack that pushed her into the staircase at the back of the foyer. Mario landed right next to her, thudding against the ground and meeting her eyes with a determined glare. Their eyes took note of each other for just one split second, but in that moment they realized each other's presence. Not just as opponents, but as full-fledged enemies. He threw a punch at her, but she grabbed him by the wrist and flung him over her shoulder and crashing onto the floor behind her. Due to the extremely well-waxed tile, he slid another 10 feet before coming to a complete stop. Gino followed up his beam with a Gino Whirl, a disc so powerful that, timed correctly, it could cause critical damage with just a graze. He charged up the attack, launched it forward, and Bowsette caught it.
Kaka.
She threw it back, this time at Jamie T, who was currently dancing instead of fighting. It hit her and knocked her out immediately. Jean took out some magic pistols and began firing what appeared to be magic lasers. Mario didn't keep very good track of his allies' abilities this time around, to be honest. Toadsworth, who was entering the vicinity holding a triple pie, freaked out and jumped, the pie flying briefly into the air. Bowsette responded by jumping, taking that pie, and launching it into Jean's face. He fell backwards and was disabled for the next several minutes, if not longer. Bowsette then took out her chomp shell, which glowed golden and was nearly blinding all by itself. She smashed Gino to the side, and Princess Shokara's mysterious magics were unable to create a shield around herself and she was hit as well. Mario knew this was going to end poorly if they didn't try something desperate, and fast.
Don't you have some cool final blow to end me?
Bowsette asked.
Surely you didn't come all this way without a plan.
TT created 5 time-displaced clones of himself, but Bowsette shattered 3 of them in one swing. Here he went.
Here it is!
Mario shouted, holding up the mushroom soul receptacle. The glass mushroom broke open, sending the 7 mushroom souls flying around the foyer and circling around Bowsette. She was as confused as could be, unsure of whether to attack the souls or ignore them and keep clobbering Mario's allies. She tried to do both, sending fireballs on ground level and then jumping into the sky to bash the ethereal wisps around her. The bashing was ineffective as mushroom souls were intangible, but one of the fireballs hit Gino, setting his wooden doll form on fire instantly. He began running around the foyer in a bright blaze, but there was little that could be done for him. Mario had to act before the mushroom souls merged. He jumped in front of another fireball that was about to hit Princess Shokara and deflected it back towards Bowsette with his super cape. Since Bowsette was still airborne, that fireball instead crashed into and destroyed an original family portrait of House Toadstool, but at least Shokara was safe. He looked back at her and she stared at him with eyes of adoration, face aflame with a passionate blush. In turn, he winked, as he was wont to do. It was only appropriate. Bowsette landed and wrapped Jean around with her chain, pulling it like a whip and bringing him right up to her. He tried to break free, but the magical golden glow of the chain made it impossible to escape.
"How do you like my crown, big boy?"
she asked, her tongue out and sharpened teeth showing prominently. Jean took off his fedora, revealing the sweat covering his forehead and the bald area of his head.
Ma'am," he
began.
"I just want to let you know that I could never hurt a woman. You may hurt yourselves if you go with the bad boys all the time, but if you ever need a man who's sensitive and kind, you can always look to me. Be by your side. I'll have you. No, I was a pro golfer, and I won a sponsorship from the Orbulin Corporation." "Bad boys?"
Bowsette scoffed.
"Kaka, I don't need bad boys. I can do bad all by myself."
Jean gulped. At this moment, what was left of Gino's charred body collapsed onto the floor, the fire mostly extinguished. The entire castle would smell like ash for a week.
"M'lady,"
Jean said.
"Don't worry, you'll be okay,
Bowsette.
I'll treat you like a virgin, touched for the very first time."
Jean gulped again, and Bowsette opened her mouth to begin charging a massive breath of fire. At the same time, Princess Peach emerged from a side room and entered the foyer, looking on at this scene in relative horror.
"Mario? What are you doing?"
she shouted.
"We're here,"
Mario replied with great enthusiasm. She seemed to realize what was happening and gasped.
"No, wait, stop this."
But at this moment the mushroom souls finally merged together into a large ethereal being in the shape of a toad, but with human-sized proportions and a cap that was 3 feet in diameter. It stuck out its cloud-like hand and shot a vicious beam Bowsette's way, sending sealing magic into every pore of her body. She would be completely depowered, if the spell worked as the shamans described, and they would have a chance to defeat her for good. It worked. Her chain lost its luster, turning grey and then brown with rust. Jean broke free, but instead of fighting he merely fainted. But then something unexpected happened. The crown on Bowsette's head cracked and then fell off. Bowsette's form disappeared, morphing and shifting into something else. She grew taller, wider, her eyes glowing brighter, all as if they had unveiled her true form, a much more sinister, evil.
Bowser?
Mario did not see this coming. Bowser roared out, a cry of pain and agony and rage, fire bursting out of his mouth as he shouted towards the ceiling. It was powerful enough that it broke off the chandelier, which fell down and crashed into him on the head. He burst out of the self-created cage a moment later, but by then TT had created another 10-time clones, all of which ran up to Bowser. He took out the sonic symbols he had used only once before. But they, too, were powerless, at least as far as Mario could tell. They weren't even good normal symbols. The TT reached him and began beating the ever-loving shit out of him.
"Please!"
Bowser cried.
"Please! Stop!"
In unison, all of the TTs said only, "No!" And Mario was proud. End of chapter. Chapter 17, Chapter 17, The Kingdom Ablaze. Chapter 17, The Kingdom Ablaze. Holly Koopa fumbled with her keyring, hands shaking as she hurriedly tried to locate her house key and get inside. A car alarm went off behind her and spooked her, but when nobody showed up behind her she was able to regain her composure and find her key. She went inside. And her home was wrecked. Furniture overturned, glass covering the floor, her late husband's shell cracked and ashes spilled out. Spray painted on her TV was a simple message, "KOOPAS get out." Holly couldn't bear to look at it, she ran back outside crying. Shroom City wasn't supposed to be like this. This was supposed to be for the bumpkins in the Toadwood Forest, not here. Why? Why did they hate her so much? She had no destination, but she kept on running. It was all she could do.
And effective immediately, I will depart from the Mushroom Kingdom, never to return,
Merlin said, looking down at the floor.
I apologize for any pain I have caused you or your families. It was only my intention to keep the governmental change stable and easy, not to hurt any of you. And that's what happened. Traitor! Stay here and let us take care of you. Merlin should stand trial with Bowser. They're best buds. Yeah. Justice for the Mushroom Kingdom.
In a holding cell in an unmarked dungeon in an unmarked castle in an unknown location in Dark Land. Boom Boom sat amongst a dozen other political prisoners, chained up and huddled in whispers. If the Koopa trolls outside heard them, they'd be beaten. But they still spoke. It was their only way of staying sane. He had heard whispers, literally, of what was going on outside. Not outside this building, per se, it was obvious what was going on in Bowser's kingdom, with the worst succession crisis he had ever been witness to. The revolution against Morton Koopa was deadly and it was a half-decade struggle. Boom Boom had seen his own people suffer and his home destroyed, and for a while he never thought it would have an ending except in his own death. But that revolution was a noble cause fought by honorable comrades against a tyrannical evil. This succession struggle was nothing more than a sham. So many dead, so many imprisoned, so much destruction. And it was all for naught, apparently. For those whispers Boom Boom heard. They were that Bowser was alive and well, but captured by the Mushroom Kingdom. Boom Boom looked up at the ceiling and said a little prayer to himself.
Wherever you are, Bowser. Boom Boom is looking out for you, buddy. Be strong. Be the king you were meant to be.
Boom Boom tried to say that, at least. His voice was too dry to make any sound come out of his throat. Instead, he said it in his mind. And that was enough. They were coming by sea, just like Lumpy had said. A vast armada of dozens of warships and hundreds of smaller boats approached the coast, Mustafa could see from his telescope. If they reached land, they would surely set a direct path to Dry City, and with their meager militia and the vast desert before them, they could hardly wage an effective guerrilla war. If they made landfall, the Republic was doomed. The man standing in the boat next to him, though, stood tall and proud. He was Jonathan Jones, a captain recommended specifically by Lumpy himself. A proud pirate with decades of experience at sea, he seemed to look down the armada not with fear, but with anticipation.
They're using pirate guy ships,
Jonathan said, his sharky fins flapping in the wind.
That means they have low priority on this attack. The warships must be skeleton crews, too. You mean they have an army of dry bones soldiers on board?
Mustafa asked.
No, I mean, never mind. If I am reading this formation right, it appears the Mushroom Kingdom has hired none other than Captain Syrup to lead the charge.
Jonathan continued.
My men have dealt with her before. Admiral Bobbery may be in command, but Captain Syrup is the real leader behind a force like this, surely. She won't be a problem, as long as you have those bonsai bill cannons I asked for. They were provided,
Mustafa said. Provided with a heavy interest loan from the Red Bob-omb army. If they won this war, he had no idea how they would pay for everything they were afforded. They may never be able to, with dry's meager resources and isolated geography. But freedom tasted too sweet just to give up. They had to fight.
He must stand trial,
Toadsworth said.
He had control of the Senate and the courts. He's too dangerous to be kept alive,
said Chancellor Toad. He had more overt control over the judicial process, even if Toadsworth had more direct access to the princess herself, and the Chancellor was going to keep it that way, like some young squirt like Toadsworth was going to steal it all away from him. Bah!
Can't we just exile him to Cool Mountain?
Toadsworth suggested.
Our dissident regions are angry that the Mushroom Kingdom so readily transformed into a warmongering dictatorship just because of a change in leadership. If we show that we are at peace again, they will rejoin. But
Toadsworth tried collecting his words.
We have to look fair. We can't appear to be what Bowser already was.
The Chancellor was disgusted. But he had to admit that Toadsworth was right in this, if only this.
But you know how the trial must end. We can't place Bowser anywhere without considering that he may return. The Mr. Snowmans will riot if we place him anywhere near their territory, after what happened in Sherbet Land. He's already shown he can escape from an island, and he knows the underground tunnels beneath the continent too well. We have to end this while we can. I understand,
Toadsworth said.
But as far as this line of thought goes, Peach has the final word, you know.
Toadsworth stood up and began departing from the conference room.
Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go inform Prince Mallow about the fate of his parents. Good luck on that,
the Chancellor said. Peach having the final word. The Chancellor almost laughed. It hadn't been a real monarchy in a decade. It wasn't suddenly going to become one again overnight. He knew who held the real power in the Mushroom Kingdom. End of chapter. Chapter 18, wherein Bowser cries a lot. Chapter 18, wherein Bowser cries a lot. Bowser cried. He touched the top of his head, feeling nothing there but the red patch of hair that had always been there, here inside this oversized body to fit his undersized soul. Down 40 floors underneath the ground, in this prison from what used to be the Koopa Bros. Fortress. Those imbeciles. What he'd give to be around them these days, in a life that wasn't filled with utter misery. But they went missing shortly after Mario defeated them in their own hideout. They had apparently fled Bowser's inevitable revenge, abandoning their identities and slipping into a new life in First Letter World. They were probably right to do so. Bowser's temperament back then was unforgiving. But looking back, surely he would have kept them around. They were loyal, crafty, and while they weren't too bright, they were tenacious enough that they would have served him well in other plans. They would probably have been much more successful than the Brutals, that's for sure. That didn't happen. Bowser was instead captured and sent to prison, awaiting a trial he knew nothing about, with no visitors and no company. He appeared to the sole prisoner in the entire floor, as if he was so special that they would reserve this honor just for him. Bowser clutched at his chest. His thick, muscle-bound chest, hard to the touch and firm like the monster she was. She hated herself. Her time as Bowsette had been the best time of his life. Better than overthrowing Morton Koopa, better than crushing Shisai's rebellion, better than all the parties she ruined, tournaments she crashed, heroes and villains she defeated. Bowser wanted nothing more than to return to that time, but all she could do was sit in this holding cell and continue to cry. Stop it. Bowser was no longer Bowsette. That time was over. He was done. There was a rattling from the nearby elevator as its rickety chains pulled down a passenger. It was a small pig wearing glasses, and one who seemed to have imbibed substances shortly before arriving, from the way he stumbled towards this cell. Not directly looking Bowser in the eye, the pig spoke.
"You don't know me, I don't know you,"
he said.
"This is how this works. I'm Professor Chops. They subpoenaed me into this and now I'm going to be your defense attorney. That okay?"
"Yes," Bowser said, softly.
"You sure you don't want to be your own counsel? You're allowed. You're certainly allowed it. I do not have to help you here if you don't need it." "It's fine."
Professor Chops groaned.
"This is going to ruin my career, isn't it?"
He started pacing back and forth in front of Bowser's cell. Bowser didn't even know why it was locked, like this. With no other prisoners, no guards, and an elevator that didn't even work, what use was it to put him in a cramped enclosure except to torture him? Oh, that's exactly what it was.
"We're going to have to settle on an insanity plea,"
Chops said.
"Do you think you can pull it off? Pretend like the Super Crown was messing with your mind, caused you to do stupid things that violated all the treaties in the world? I mean, kidnapping the princess is anything, but pulling off a coup under the guise of a busted woman. They just aren't gonna believe this. You'll have to act positively, Lupe. I mean, you've gotten mind controlled before. Just pretend Cacletta did it, yeah."
Back when Bowser was Boletta. Ugh. He wanted to curl up in a little ball and stop existing. That would make him feel a lot better than he did right now. Bowser stopped listening to Chops as he prattled on about a trial that was sure not to be of any real investigative substance. And then he fell asleep, right then and there, just to let the time pass. End of chapter. Chapter 19, Chapter 19, Is it alright for such a visit? Chapter 19, Is it alright for such a visit? Peach didn't like it one bit that they were traveling down the narrow, short elevator coming down to see Bowsette like this. If she had it her way, they would simply keep her down here for the rest of time, at least until there was a good enough path to redemption. Redemption? Peach never thought she'd be saying that about someone as vile and evil as Bowsette. Bowser? She remembered that moment, not so long ago, when Bowser had asked her in no uncertain terms to call her Bowsette. But so much had happened since then, and he had lost the Super Crown by now, so she wasn't sure what the situation was now. She would keep calling Bowser by Bowser for now, if only to keep it all consistent in her head, but she felt a pang of guilt upon deciding it so. Peach had tried explaining all of this to Mario the other night, but he didn't seem like he had any ability to understand it. Then again, with how rarely he expressed his own feelings, it was impossible for Peach to understand anything about him, either. Finally, they reached the bottom floor of the prison. They had passed so many floors of despicable criminals that had plagued the Mushroom Kingdom, like the Resner Gang and their rivals the Rexes, the serial killer Toad Bundy, the evil Thwomp King himself. And yet Peach felt guilt towards all of them. This was such a horrible place to live, and they were unable to bring themselves out of the prisoners, locking away the goodness in their hearts. This was not rehabilitation, this was simple punishment. She was the royal ruler of the Mushroom Kingdom. Why she was letting this simply happen was... well, it was out of fear of ignorance. She trusted her advisors, and they had never even deigned it necessary to mention prison conditions to her before now. No one thought it relevant. They reached Bowser's cell, the only occupied one in the entire prison. He saw the two of them, and his eyes brightened up for a moment before settling back into a distant grimace.
"Hiya, Bowser,"
Mario said.
"How are you doing?" "I'm fine,"
he replied curtly.
"I wanted to see you personally,"
Peach said.
"As you may know, your criminal trial is tomorrow, and it may be a very emotional event for you. If you need us to delay it..." "I don't need it." "Even so. If there is anything you need, please do not hesitate to ask. You are an evil lizard, but we have still known you for so long that..."
Bowser got up and walked up to the bar.
"My fire powers no longer work because of your boyfriend's soul power,"
he began.
"But if I had them, I promise you would be in flames right now."
Peach backed away a few steps. Bowser grinned, all his teeth showing and his red mane hairs standing up. But even with the menacing glare, his eyes could not hide the sadness within his heart. And that's what made Peach upset the most. Not the empty threats or the threatening looks. The crushing disappointment he gave towards her. She knew mixing pity and anger simultaneously was dangerous. This was all getting out of hand. End of chapter. Chapter 20, Chapter 20, Trials of the Koopamancer. Chapter 20, Trials of the Koopamancer. Professor Chops was nearly asleep by this point, but Bowser was at his most attentive. His life was on the line, here. Not that he cared, but he was genuinely interested in hearing all of the horrible crimes he had committed over the years. It appeared as though he had done more to help the Mushroom Kingdom in the end than harm it, from the way that they presented all of this.
"As you can see in Chart 4,
some toad with glasses and a purple cap said.
The damage caused by Bowser's attack forced us to provide significant upgrades to the Perplex Expressway as well as the Star Express, including track electrification and safety measure improvements. That was a significant detriment to our national debt in that fiscal year and was not covered by insurance, so..."
Bowser raised his hand. Everyone stopped.
"Yes."
Judge Toad, wearing a cap-shaped wig on her head, asked.
"Can I use the bathroom?"
he asked.
"No."
Judge Toad shouted.
"Criminals don't get to go to the bathroom during their trials." "Then can I get a verdict?"
Judge Toad rapidly flipped through the giant code of laws to see if the right to a fair and speedy trial was still on the books.
"Yeah, I guess so if you want it. It's gonna be guilty though." "Whatever." "Okay."
The Judge Toad slammed her gavel down.
"Bowser is found guilty on all 4,130 counts. Sentenced to death by firing squad."
The crowd gasped, but Bowser shrugged. "What, It's not like they were going to exile him to Flipper's Lake to go rot in some frozen wasteland the rest of his life. He was too much of a risk to them, even if unbeknownst to most of them, his magical energy had been completely sapped away by the mushroom souls and had yet to return in any form. So execution was about what he expected. Bowser stood up as two toad guardsmen walked up beside him, ready to escort him out of the building and back to the prison where he would await his final day on Earth. Bowser stood up as two toad guardsmen walked up beside him, ready to escort him out of the building and back to the prison where he would await his final day on Earth. The crowd went into an uproarious cheer, chanting and chiding this evil Koopa for all the terrible crimes he committed. That was okay. Such was life. 6 months ago he was abdicating his throne out of a feeling of frustrated dissatisfaction. 3 months ago he was ruling over the Mushroom Kingdom with a feeling of frustrated dissatisfaction. Today he was being sentenced to death with a feeling of frustrated dissatisfaction. But then something happened. Peach, sitting in an inconspicuous corner of the courtroom, stood up and walked up to the judge. Everyone was completely confused as to what was going on. She had never attended a public trial before, not in her life, not even when her uncle, the traitorous Toadius Toadstool, had been captured.
I have something to say, something to decree,
Peach said, everyone waiting on her word with bated breath.
We can't let the past rule our future. We can't allow ourselves to see the world set in stone. Except for you Whomps, don't worry about you. But Bowser here, in the time I have known him, has changed. Everyone remembers his first attacks against the Mushroom Kingdom. He transformed everyone into blocks and plants and coins. He took over our castles and ruled with an iron fist. It was evil, and it was wrong. But we defeated him. But he's changed from that. Improved, gotten better. You may not believe it, but Bowser has slowly become a better person. With true rehabilitation, he could become a genuinely good person someday. Sentencing him to death will only enrage Dark Land and create another Bowser to one day terrorize our kingdom again. Do we really want that?
The crowd was silent. Then Peach pulled out a super crown. Another one. What the Brighton was going on? Had she really? Was she really going to?
In my private time with Bowser, I have discovered that redemption may really be possible. And it is for that reason that I pardon King Koopa, ruler of the lava pits, heir to the ancient Koopamancer, and as a token of peace give this present.
And then a giant tank burst into the courtroom. End of chapter.